Miss, wake up, there's a fire. Go find someone. Biwu shouted to someone outside, then turned back to pound on the door. Miss. I sat up. On the Kong table to my right, the bronze oil lamp was indeed tilted. The wick had burned out, and the body of the lamp was leaning precariously, just a breath away from toppling over. In my past life, I had reached out in a panic to steady it, but my fingertips touched the scalding metal. I flinched, inadvertently knocking the lamp over. The boiling oil spilled onto the handkerchief at the edge of the table, and the flames leaped up to catch the curtains. I fell off the couch and lost consciousness. By the time I woke up, Lady Wang of the Xie family had already been burned to a cinder. In this life, I didn't touch that lamp. Miss. Biwu's voice was already tinged with a sob. I threw back the covers and got out of bed, stepping barefoot onto the cold brick floor. I bypassed the lamp, walked to the door, and pulled back the latch. Biwu tumbled inside, covered in dust, with a black smudge of soot on the tip of her nose. She grabbed my wrist and tugged me outward. Hurry, let's go. The fire has already spread from the old madam's quarters. I wrenched my hand free. Miss? Biwu froze in shock. I stepped back 2 paces, snatched the oil lamp from the bedside table, and splashed the remaining dregs of oil onto the hem of my skirt. The wax oil, mixed with lamp soot, looked like a dark stain where it landed. Miss, what are you doing? Go call for help, I interrupted her, my voice raised so it could be heard across the hallway. The old madam is still in the east wing. The fire started over there. Go tell them to shore up the beams in the east wing first. Biwu's mouth hung open. And what about you? I'm going over to take a look. With that, I turned and headed straight out. Biwu called out Miss from behind me, but she didn't follow. She had always been obedient to my words, especially at critical moments like this. The hallway of the east wing was already half consumed by the flames. The fire had poured in through the back window of Madame Xie's room. The moment I reached the entrance of the hallway, I understood in my past life, the fire started in the kitchen, and it was the same in this life. However, in my previous life, the kitchen fire was said to have started because the embers in the stove hadn't been fully extinguished, a conclusion Xie Chongwen reached after his investigation. But standing here now, I could clearly see that the latch on the back window of Madame Xie's room was broken. The copper buckle lay on the ground, the break clean and even, cut by a blade. Just like in my past life. Help, someone help me. Xie Wangshi's voice drifted out from the east wing, sharp as fingernails scraping against porcelain. The fire had already sealed her doorway. She couldn't get out, and she didn't dare jump from the window. Outside the window was a narrow alley, and she was afraid of breaking her legs. Young mistress! Someone shouted from the other end of the hallway. It was a servant, rushing this way with a bucket of water. He saw me and shouted even louder, "Young mistress, get back." I didn't retreat. I took 3 steps forward, stopping right beside the pillar in the center of the hallway. Tongues of fire curled out from the cracks of the east wing door, the heat hitting my face like a glowing red iron plate. Inside the room, Lady Xie was wailing, "Is that you, Yin? Yin, hurry, call for help." She heard someone approaching. She thought it was someone coming to save her. I reached out and gripped the horizontal bronze paperweight on the pillar. It was normally used to hang the curtains in the hallway, a heavy bronze lump 2 fingers wide. I yanked the paperweight down from its hook. Young mistress! The servant was almost upon me. I turned around, leaning my back against the pillar, and raised the paperweight behind my ear. The firelight made the bronze glow, reflecting half of my face. Then, I slammed into it with all my might. The moment the bronze paperweight struck the hollow of my skull behind the ear, a flash of white light exploded before my eyes, followed by a wash of solid red. The pain squeezed through the seams of my bones, a duller ache than when the beam snapped my spine in my past life, but that dull thud was precise enough. I slid down the pillar, my knees hitting the ground first, then my shoulder, and finally, my forehead struck the gap between the bricks. Young mistress. The servant's bucket crashed to the ground, spilling water everywhere. He rushed over to support me, his hands shaking like leaves in the wind. I heard him shouting, "Someone help! The young mistress has fainted." His voice growing fainter and more distant. The last thing I heard was Madame Xie's heart-wrenching wails from inside the room. But as I lay on the ground, I knew full well that her window opened toward the alley. Even with the door engulfed in flames, if she had the courage to jump from the window, she would at most break a leg. But she didn't dare. Just like in my previous life, she crouched in the room until the fire reached her body before screaming and rushing out. By the time she emerged, she was a ball of fire, rolling onto the floor of the passageway and pinning me down just as a falling beam had crushed my spine. In this life, I lay on the ground. The pillars of the passageway shielded me from a half-burnt purlin falling from above. The fire did not reach me. Although I had poured oil on my hem, the servant had splashed a bucket of water nearby first. The water soaked into the cracks between the bricks, keeping the flames at bay. Someone lifted my shoulders. I heard Biwu crying. I heard someone shouting, "Quick, fetch a doctor." I used the cover of the commotion to slowly steady my breathing. The back of my head throbbed as if it had been split open, but my limbs were still functional. I let the bronze paperweight slip from my hand. It fell to the ground, blending into the mess of shattered tiles and charred wood chips where no one would spare it a glance. Miss, please open your eyes." Biwu cradled my head, her tears falling onto my forehead. The fire was still raging. A thunderous crash echoed from the direction of the east wing, likely a roof beam collapsing. Xie Chongwen hadn't jumped from the window. That sound was the roof of her room caving in. My lips moved slightly. The east wing. Biwu lowered her head to lean closer. My voice was so faint it was barely a whisper. "The old madam is in the east wing. Go, quickly." Biwu froze for a moment, then turned to shout at those nearby, "Quick! The old madam is still in the east wing. Save her!" The sound of footsteps scattered. Someone ran past my feet, stepping on the hem of my skirt. I kept my eyes closed, listening to Biwu wiping the soot from my face. Her sleeve caused a slight sting as it brushed against my temple. The sound of the night watchman's clappers drifted in from beyond the distant walls. Third watch had just passed. I did the math. In my past life, the officials arrived just as the sky was beginning to brighten. Xie Chongwen returned with them. The first thing he asked upon entering was, "How is mother?" And only then did he ask, "Where is Lady Jiang?" I kept my eyes closed, waiting for dawn. Dull throbs of pain surged from the back of my head in waves, but I knew I had hit the right spot. The skull wasn't fractured, only the flesh was swollen. When the physician arrived, he would say it was caused by impact, with blood stasis accumulating under the skin, and then he would prescribe me a few formulas to promote blood circulation and resolve the bruising. They would never know I had struck myself. They would only see a young wife with clothes scorched by fire, her hem stained with oil, collapsed by the pillar in the hallway, her face so soot-streaked that her features were barely recognizable. Biwu was speaking to me in a low voice, talking incessantly, telling me not to sleep, saying the water had been thrown, and that the fire in the east wing had been suppressed. "Where is the old lady?" Biwu paused for a moment. Her voice trembled. "She hasn't been found yet." I gave a soft hum of acknowledgement and didn't ask further. The sound of the fire gradually subsided. Someone lit lanterns, their amber glow filtering through my closed eyelids. Servants hurried back and forth between the hallway and the east wing, their footsteps splashing in the puddles. In the distance, someone was coughing, and another was shouting, "This side has collapsed, stay back." I am waiting for dawn. I am lying here now. Biwu's hand is still shaking, but it is very warm. I whispered, "Don't be afraid." Biwu didn't seem to hear me, because she was crying. The last piece of the collapsed beam from the east wing was dragged out. Someone walked past my head carrying a bucket, and the water dripping from the rim splashed onto Biwu's sleeve. I calculated that in another hour, Xie Chongwen should arrive. As dawn was breaking, someone pushed open the courtyard gate. The night watchman patrolling the neighboring alley heard the commotion and called for the ward chief, who arrived with 2 bailiffs from the magistrate's office following behind him. Biwu heard them first. She patted my shoulder and said, "Miss, the officials are here." I slowly opened my eyes. The throbbing pain at the back of my head persisted, though it had dulled compared to an hour ago. Biwu took a handkerchief dipped in cold water and pressed it against my temple. The edges of the cloth were still stained with soot. The ward warden's voice rang out from beyond the vestibule, "Where is the master of this house?" "My master is on duty at the Hanlin Academy and hasn't returned yet," replied old Zhao, the gatekeeper, his voice hushed. "As for the old madam hasn't been found yet." The officer didn't respond, his footsteps echoing as he entered the hallway. Someone knelt down to examine the brick floor beside me, then glanced up at the half-collapsed roof of the east wing, whispering something to his companion. I turned my head just in time to see an officer emerge from the ruins of the east wing, holding a charred section of a door bolt. He flipped it over to inspect the break, then looked up toward the local headman. The headman hurried over, and the two exchanged a few low words. I couldn't make out the speech, but I could see their movements clearly. The officer handed the bolt to the headman and pointed to the edge of the fracture. The headman took it, squinting at it for a moment, and the color of his face shifted. "What happened with this window?" the officer asked. No one answered. After a moment, old Zhao's voice rang out, "That's the old lady's back window. It was perfectly fine yesterday." "Perfectly fine yesterday?" The bailiff thrust the door bolt forward. The copper buckle on this break was sliced open with a knife. It was already broken before the fire started. "And you're telling me it was fine yesterday?" Old Zhao went silent. I closed my eyes again. It was exactly the same as in my previous life. The officers had discovered that window latch in less time than it takes to drink 2 cups of tea. But in my last life, I was unconscious, and I only heard about this later from Xie Chongwen. He claimed a villain climbed through the window and set the fire, shifting the blame onto a local gambler. The gambler spent half a month in jail before Xie Chongwen used silver to get him released, and the case was simply dropped. In this life, I am awake. But I do not intend to speak. Biwu lowered her head, leaning close to my ear. "Miss. That window." I moved my finger slightly, resting it on her wrist. Biwu fell silent immediately, swallowing the rest of her words, and simply wrung out a fresh, cool cloth to replace the one on my forehead. "Out of the way, out of the way." Footsteps echoed again from the courtyard gate. This time they were fast, the soles of the boots hitting the stone floor with urgent, heavy thuds. "Where is our madam? Where is our young lady?" It was the people from the Count of Pingyuan's estate. A gust of wind followed the voice inside, carrying the dampness of morning dew. I heard Biwu take a sharp breath, as if she were about to cry but held it back. The footsteps stopped beside me. Someone crouched down and reached out a hand to check my breathing. The fingers were coarse and carried a chill. "Still alive," the man said, turning his head to speak to someone behind him. "It's good that she's still alive." Another voice rang out, this time a woman's. Her voice was kept very low, but I recognized it. It was Nanny Kai, who served by Jiang Chenglan's side and had watched me grow up since I was a child. She crouched down on the other side and reached out to touch the back of my hand. Her fingertips were warm. "Miss?" Nanny Kai called out. I slowly pried my eyelids open. Nanny Kai's face was inches away, the corners of her eyes completely bloodshot and her lips pursed tight. She only let out half a sigh of relief when she saw me open my eyes. "Do you still recognize me?" "Nanny." I opened my mouth, my throat parched. Hearing my voice, Nanny Kai finally seemed to truly relax. She turned toward the courtyard gate and shouted, "The young lady is awake. Quick, go tell the master." Someone outside the gate answered and ran off. What on earth happened? Nanny Kai turned her head, her gaze falling upon the charred remains of the east wing, visible through the passageway. Where is your family's old madam? No one answered her. Biwu kept her head lowered, wiping the soot from my ear with a handkerchief without saying a word. I ask you, where is the old madam? Nurse Kai raised her voice. Old Zhao poked his head out from the passageway, his face also covered in dust and ash. We haven't found her yet. Nurse Kai's lip twitched. She turned her head to look at me, then at the patch of oil-soaked, scorched fabric on my skirt, and finally at the bleeding lump on the back of my head. How did she get hurt? She was hit by a bronze paperweight, Biwu finally spoke. The young miss rushed in to call for the old madam when a purlin fell from the ceiling of the passageway. The vibration knocked a bronze paperweight off a pillar, and it struck her behind the ear. Her voice trembled as she spoke, yet every word was clear and distinct. Nanny Kai stared at her for a moment but asked no further questions. She reached into her robe, pulled out a small vial of medicine, uncorked it, and poured some onto a handkerchief. She then pressed it gently against the swelling on the back of my head. The cool sting of the medicinal liniment seeping into my skin made me instinctively hunch my shoulders. Endure it, Nanny Kai said. It's swollen so high, we'll have to reapply the medicine when we get back. I gave a soft grunt of affirmation. Footsteps echoed from outside the courtyard gate again. This time they were scattered, the sound of several pairs of boots stepping onto the stone slabs all at once. Someone shouted, "The prefectural governor has arrived," and then a middle-aged man dressed in blue-gray official robes stepped over the threshold, followed by two clerks. The ward chief went up to meet him, handing over the section of the door bolt he held in his hand. The prefect took it, examined the fracture, and then glanced toward the east wing. His face remained expressionless as he turned to the clerk and said, "Record this, the copper window latch was severed cleanly, not melted by charcoal fire." Behind him, the clerk spread out his paper and brush and began to write. The prefect took 2 more steps forward and came to a halt in the center of the hallway. His gaze fell upon the spot where I lay, then shifted upward to the pillar blocking the purlin, and finally landed on the section of the copper paperweight on the floor. Is this what injured her? The prefect asked Biwu. Biwu nodded. The prefect bent down to pick up the bronze paperweight, turned it over a few times to examine it, and then placed it back in its original spot. Who was the first to discover her? It was me. A servant squeezed out from the back of the crowd, his face still streaked with soot from the previous night. It was the same man who had rushed in carrying a water bucket. His voice was a bit hoarse. When I brought the water over, I saw the young mistress unconscious at the base of the pillar. At that time, the fire was already leaping out from the cracks of the east wing door, and the purlin at the top of the pillar was already loose. Which way was she facing at the time? Facing the east wing, the servant said with certainty. She was facing the door of the east wing. When I ran over, she was still clutching a handkerchief in her hand. Later, Miss Biwu said she was holding the handkerchief over her nose and mouth, trying to rush inside. The prefect asked no further questions. He turned around and glanced at Nanny Kai. Are you from the Pingyuan Earl's Manor? Yes, Nanny Kai stood up and curtsied. This old servant was ordered by my master to come and visit the eldest young mistress. The Earl of Pingyuan is most thoughtful. The prefect nodded, then turned his gaze back toward the collapsed, charred ruins of the east wing. The person hasn't been found yet? Still clearing it out, old Zhao replied. The prefect fell silent for a moment, then lifted his foot and walked toward the ruins of the east wing. His boots stepped onto the charred timber, making a creaking, splintering sound. The clerk followed behind him, his brush tip moving incessantly. I lay where I was, listening to the sound of them turning over bricks and tiles. The throbbing pain at the back of my head surged in waves, but what was clearer than the pain were the thoughts racing through my mind. The break in the window latch had been noted, the bronze paperweight had been seen exactly where it lay, and the servants had clearly described the direction in which I had charged. Every word was correct. Every word was true. Except for the fact that I had chosen the angle and force with which that bronze paperweight struck my head, everything else had played out exactly as it had in the memories of my past life. Nanny Kai leaned in closer, tucking the bottle of medicinal wine into her bosom. "Miss, once things are settled here, the master wants you to return to the manor to live." I didn't open my eyes. Chongwen hasn't returned yet. It's the same whether he returns or not. Nanny Kai's voice was kept very low, so low that only Biwu and I could hear her. "The master said he knows exactly what kind of life you've been leading here. It's your business if you're willing to endure hardship, but as your father, he cannot watch you jump into a fiery pit. Once this fire is out, if you wish to go back, the gates of the Count's manor will always be open to you." I remained silent for a moment. "Nanny," I spoke, my voice still raspy, "the old madam is still inside." Nanny Kai did not respond to that. She simply reached out to smooth the scorched strands of hair at my temples, her fingertips brushing lightly against the curve of my ear. "Young miss, it is already a blessing from the heavens that you survived this time." Having said that, she stood up and beckoned to a maid following behind her, signaling for her to help me up from the ground. "Let us return to the manor first, and wait until the yamen has concluded their investigation." Biwu helped me sit up. A wave of dizziness surged from the back of my head. I closed my eyes and opened them again. Across the passageway, amidst the ruins of the east wing, the prefect was crouching by a broken wall, rubbing the ash on the ground between his fingers. Two bailiffs carried something out from a corner of the ruins, a dark, charred mass wrapped in an inner garment that had been burned into tatters. "Found one over here," one of the bailiffs shouted. The prefect stood up and walked over. I sat on the ground, watching from a distance as that scorched lump was carried to the open space in the center of the hallway. Lady Xie's features were no longer recognizable. Only half an arm was exposed, her fingers curled into a clutching gesture, the crevices of her nails filled with black ash. In the end, she hadn't jumped from the window after all. Biwu let out a soft, sharp breath beside me. "Let's go." Nanny Kai turned around and reached out her hand to me. "Don't look." I helped Biwu to her feet. The oil-stained patch on my skirt had already scorched at the edge, crumbling and falling away with a rustle as I walked. As we passed through the vestibule, my gaze swept over Lady Xie's corpse. The prefect was standing nearby, saying something to the clerk. The clerk lowered his head and jotted down a few notes. I withdrew my gaze and walked toward the courtyard gate. Footsteps followed behind me. It was old Zhao, who trotted up to the gate holding a cloak in his hands. "Young mistress. This is from the old matriarch's room. Yesterday she said if it got cold at night, I should bring it to you, but before I could." He didn't finish his sentence. Biwu took it from him, shook out the cloak, and draped it over my shoulders. The lining was still cool, carrying the scent of unburnt mugwort. Xie Wangsher had mugwort burned in her room every night, claiming it warded off mosquitoes. I wrapped my cloak tightly around me and stepped out of the courtyard gate. The morning light slanted in from the mouth of the alley, illuminating the dust-covered flagstone path. Mother Kai and two maidservants walked ahead, while Biwu supported me as we followed behind. A crowd of curious neighbors had gathered at the entrance of the alley, held back by the ward warden. Someone spotted me coming out, pointed in my direction, and whispered something to the person beside them. I walked past them with my eyes cast down. Before the sound of the courtyard gate closing behind me reached my ears, I heard the prefect speak again from the entrance hall, "Call Editor Xie back. This case, I must question him in person." The carriage from the Earl of Pingyuan's estate was parked at the entrance of the alley. Mother Kai climbed up first, then reached out to assist me. I wobbled slightly as I stepped onto the carriage stool, but Biwu supported my elbow from behind. "Slowly now," Mother Kai said. The interior of the carriage was lined with thick cushions, and a soft pillow had been placed against the backrest. I sat down and leaned back. The throbbing pain from the swelling on the back of my head pressed against the pillow, pulsing in waves. Mother Kai pulled a small porcelain bottle from a hidden compartment in the corner, uncorked it, and poured a pill into her palm to hand to me. "Keep it in your mouth, don't swallow." I took it and held it under my tongue. The medicine was bitter and astringent, a mixture of Sichuan lovage and frankincense. As it dissolved, the root of my tongue went numb. The carriage began to move. Biwu sat across from me, her head bowed as she twisted her cuffs. "Speak up," Nanny Kai said, putting the porcelain bottle away and brushing the medicinal dust off her hands. "What exactly happened last night?" Biwu looked up and glanced at me. I leaned back against the soft pillows with my eyes closed, remaining silent. Biwu bit her lip before speaking. "It's much the same as what old Zhao said. The fire started at the back window of the old madam's room just as the young miss woke up. She heard the old madam's cries and rushed straight out. I tried to stop her but couldn't. She ran toward the hallway while I went to call for people to bring water. By the time I returned, she had already collapsed at the base of a pillar." "How far were you from her when she rushed over?" "About 30 or 40 feet. Biwu's voice dropped slightly. The fire had already burst through the other end of the hallway. I took a step back to call for help, and when I looked up again, she had already reached the pillar." Nanny Kai gave a hum of acknowledgement but didn't press further. She turned her head to look at me. "Did you hear the old madam calling?" "I heard you," I said, opening my eyes, my voice still raspy. "You heard me, and yet you still rushed inside?" I didn't answer. Nanny Kai stared at me for a moment and didn't press further. She simply reached out to pull the cloak higher over my shoulders, covering the small patch of scalded, reddened skin exposed at my neck. The carriage turned a corner, its wheels rolling over a loose flagstone, causing the cabin to jolt. Biwu reached out to steady my knees, only letting go once I was stable. "The master is waiting at home," Nanny Kai said. "He woke up the moment the fire signal arrived last night and hasn't closed his eyes all night. He had me bring people out before dawn, fearing that the officials from the yamen would arrive here first and you would suffer from their words." The medicinal pill in my mouth had mostly dissolved, and the bitterness at the root of my tongue had faded slightly. "The prefect is here today," I said. "It's better that he is," Nanny Kai replied. "Whatever he sees is what will be in the case files submitted tomorrow. You don't need to say a word. What others have seen is already enough." I closed my eyes again. The carriage traveled for about half an hour before coming to a stop at the entrance of the Pingyuan baronial manor. Nanny Kai alighted first, and Biwu helped me down. Two young servants standing on the steps caught sight of me and immediately turned to run inside, shouting as they went, "The young lady is back." I lifted my foot and stepped over the threshold. The blue brick path inside the manor was lined with 2 rows of osmanthus trees. It wasn't yet the season for them to bloom, and their dense leaves shielded the morning light. Xie Chongwen stood at the entrance of the main hall with his hands behind his back. His face was expressionless, but the creases at his cuffs were deep, the kind of folds that only come from clenching one's hands all night long. "Father." I walked to the steps and called out to him. Xie Chongwen's gaze dropped from my face to the scorched edge of my skirt, then shifted back to my face. "Come in and speak." Hot tea and breakfast had been prepared in the main hall. Nanny Kai helped me into a chair, and Biwu stood behind me. Xie Chongwen settled into the head seat, took a sip of tea, and set the cup down. "The prefect's men are investigating," he said. "The window latch had been tampered with. This matter cannot be hushed up. Xie Chongwen hasn't arrived yet, but word has already been sent to the yamen. He must return within the day to explain himself in person." "Yes?" "I am well aware of the kind of life you've been living in his household." Xie Chongwen's voice was not loud, yet every word carried significant weight. "You have been married to him for 3 years. In the first year, he treated you with some civility. As for the last 2 years, he knows full well how much of your dowry you've poured into that house. Now that this has happened at his home and the yamen will be questioning you, you must think carefully about how you intend to answer. I know. Your mother-in-law is gone, and your father-in-law passed away long ago. If Xie Chongwen pushes this as an accident, the magistrate will at most rule it as negligence, and he'll settle it with a few taels of silver. Jiang Chonglan paused. But you are different. You are his lawfully wedded wife. Now that his mother is gone, you are the matriarch of the household. How this case is decided depends more on your word than the prefect's. You must think carefully about what you are going to say. The hall fell silent for a breath. I fainted at the time, I said. I don't know what happened afterward. Jiang Chonglan looked at me, his expression unchanged, but his fingertips tapped lightly on the tabletop. You fainted, he repeated the phrase. Fainted, I said once more. He watched me for a moment, then picked up his teacup and took another sip. Fine. Then you fainted. When the prefect asks, tell him you heard the shouting and ran outside, only to be knocked unconscious by a bronze paperweight, and you know nothing of what happened next. If he asks about the window latch, say you don't know. If he asks how the fire started, say you don't know either. For someone who was unconscious, knowing nothing is the cleanest story to tell. I nodded. Jiang Chonglan set down his teacup and stood up. Go change your clothes first and let the doctor examine the wound on the back of your head. Rest for a while before the people from the yamen arrive. He took 2 steps toward the door, then stopped. With his back to me, he said, girl, in all the years since you married out, your father hasn't looked after you much. But remember, your surname is Jiang, and the gates of the Pingyuan Count's estate will always be open to you. If that Xie Chongwen dares to try and gloss over this matter, your father has plenty of ways to ensure he can't. I didn't respond. He lifted his foot and walked away. Nanny Kai waited until I had sat for a moment before coming over to help me up. Let's go, miss. The hot water is already prepared in the backyard. Let's get you out of these clothes first. A wave of dizziness washed over the back of my head as I stood up, and I had to steady myself against the back of the chair for a moment to recover. Biwu reached out to support me, but I waved her off. Nanny, I said in a low voice, after the prefect finishes his questioning, Xie Chongwen will come looking for me. Yes? When he arrives, tell the gatekeeper to let him in. Nanny Kai paused for a moment. Let him in? Let him in, I said. She looked at me, her gaze lingering on my face for a moment as if weighing something. In the end, she didn't ask any further questions, simply said all right, and turned to make the arrangements. I followed Biwu toward the backyard. As we passed through the covered walkway, the morning light leaked through the gaps in the eaves, casting patches of brightness onto the gray brick floor. The throbbing pain at the back of my head began to surge again, but my thoughts remained crystal clear. Once Xie Chongwen returned, he would undoubtedly see the prefect first. When the prefect confronted him with the matter of the window bolt, he would surely claim he didn't know, call it an accident, or say someone is framing me. He was practiced in such rhetoric, usually delivered while clutching his left cuff, his knuckles turning white. Then he will come looking for me. He needs to be sure of what I saw and what I heard first. I have to make him believe I saw nothing and heard nothing. I must let him think his accident can still be covered up, and then let him realize that I knew everything all along. Biwu pushed open the door to the backyard room. The hot water was already prepared, with white steam rising from the tub, clouding half of the bronze mirror. Miss, would you like to add some calming herbs? Add it, I said. Biwu turned to fetch the medicine packet. I stood by the bath barrel, looking down at my reflection in the water. Half my hair was singed, a gray smudge streaked across my temple, and my lips were parched and cracked. But my eyes were bright. Xie Chongwen arrived late in the afternoon, during the hour of the sheep. Biwu heard the message from the gatekeeper first. She pushed the door open and said, "The son-in-law is here," still holding the medicine bowl in her hands as she spoke. "Let him in," I said, setting down the medicine bowl. Biwu placed the bowl on the table and turned to leave. I leaned back against the bolster. The swelling on the back of my head had been redressed with medicine and wrapped in a layer of fine muslin. My hair had been let down, cascading over my shoulders and concealing most of the injury. The sound of footsteps approached from the far end of the veranda. The rhythm of boot soles hitting the brick floor was neither hurried nor slow, each step measured with perfect evenness. Xie Chongwen was always like this. Even if the sky were falling, his pace would not falter. The door was pushed open. He stood at the threshold for a breath's duration before stepping inside. "Yin Yang," he called to me. His voice was low and steady, carrying a perfectly measured amount of concern, neither too much nor too little, as if precisely calibrated. "You've come," I said. He walked to the side of the couch and stood still, looking down at me. His gaze moved from my face to the cotton bandages wrapped around the back of my head, then back to my face again. He was wearing a stone blue straight-collared robe. His cuffs were neat, and there were no wrinkles on his left sleeve. He hadn't been clutching his sleeves today. "I've just come from the yamen," he said. The prefect showed me the case files. "About the window latch." "I know." He paused. I looked up at him. His gaze met mine for a fleeting moment before he looked away. "What is it that you know?" "The prefect told me," I said. "He said the copper latch on the window was cut by someone, not snapped by the fire. He said that window leads to the back alley behind your mother's room, and the alley entrance wasn't locked that night." Xie Chongwen fell silent for a moment. He pulled up a chair and sat by the couch, his posture upright, hands resting on his knees. "Yin Yang," he called out again, this time with something different in his voice, a heavy quality, as if something were being forced out under pressure. "You were in the hallway. What did you see?" "I fainted." "And before you lost consciousness?" "I heard your mother screaming," I said. I got up from the couch and ran toward the hallway. The fire had already broken out over there. As I rushed past the pillar, a purlin fell from the ceiling and a bronze paperweight flew out and struck me in the head. I don't know what happened after that. My voice was flat, my pace neither fast nor slow. I paused for a breath after every sentence, as if I were reminiscing. Xie Chongwen did not respond immediately after listening. His gaze fell upon my hand resting outside the quilt. He looked at it for a moment, then looked up again. "Then, before you passed out, did you see?" "I didn't see anyone," I interrupted him, "nor did I hear any other sounds. When I ran to the pillar, I only heard the fire burning and your mother screaming. After that, I don't know anything." Xie Chongwen's eyelids flickered slightly. It was so brief that I wouldn't have noticed it at all if I hadn't been staring at his face. It was an expression of relief. The fingertips of his left hand relaxed slightly against his knee, the previously tense curve gradually smoothing out. "You've worked hard," he said. "I will explain things to the prefect. Your injuries haven't healed yet, so rest well for now. I'll come to take you back once the yamen has closed the case." He stood up as soon as he finished speaking, his movements swifter than when he had entered, as if he were in a hurry to leave. "Chongwen," I called out to him. He turned back. "About the window latch," I said. "The prefect said that window was cut open from the outside. Did you or your mother have any enemies?" Xie Chongwen paused for a breath. That breath was very short, but since he never usually faltered when speaking, this single beat felt particularly conspicuous. "No," he said, his voice a fraction harder than before. "Focus on recovering. Don't think about these things anymore." He turned and walked out. I heard his footsteps cross the veranda, heard him tell Biwu at the door to take good care of her, and then the sound of his footsteps grew further and further away. Biwu entered with a freshly brewed bowl of medicine, closed the door, and walked over to the couch. "Miss, he's gone." "Yes?" Did he believe it? "He did," I said. Biwu placed the medicine bowl on the table and stood by, watching me for a moment. "Regarding the matter of the window latch, how does he plan to explain it to the prefect?" "He'll say he doesn't know." I picked up the medicine bowl and took a sip, the bitterness spreading from the tip of my tongue to the back of my throat. "He'll say it might have been some petty thieves from the streets who broke into steal and set the fire on a whim. He'll say he knew nothing of these matters, that he was on duty at the Hanlon Academy and didn't return all night, all of which the Yamen can verify." "Will the prefect believe him?" "It doesn't matter whether the prefect believes him or not." I swallowed the mouthful of medicine and set the bowl back on the table. "What matters is what's written in the case files. Tomorrow at the hour of Qin, when the court convenes, the prefect will read the files aloud in front of everyone. After he finishes, he will come to ask me whether I know everything or whether I know nothing at all." Biwu looked down at the tips of her shoes. After a moment, she finally spoke. "Miss, what is it that you know?" I leaned back against the pillow, the sharp pain at the back of my head gradually receding into a dull, heavy ache. "I know who cut that window," I said. "I know who set the fire. I also know he started bringing tung oil into the house 3 months ago, claiming it was for renovating the study. In reality, that barrel of oil was kept in the woodshed behind the east wing. When the fire started from the back window, the oil was right there beneath it." Biwu jerked her head up. Her lips parted for a moment, then pressed shut again. "Miss, why didn't you say anything just now?" "What I just said doesn't count," I said, closing my eyes. "The court convenes tomorrow at the hour of Qin, and the prefect will ask again. Only what I say then will truly count." Biwu asked no more. She reached out to take the medicine bowl away and tucked in the corners of my quilt. Outside the window, the sky gradually darkened. Someone lit the lamps in the veranda, and the dim yellow light leaked through the window paper, casting a small patch of shadow onto the top of the bed curtains. I lay on the couch with my eyes closed, mentally rehearsing every step of tomorrow. Xie Chongwen should have returned to his own residence by now. He will pay a visit to the Chui Manor tonight. He will tell Cui Shuijian that the Jiang woman saw nothing, and he will put her mind at ease. Meanwhile, Cui Shuijian will send people to the Yamen to pull some strings, finding a way to ensure that a page or two of the case files accidentally goes missing before the court convenes tomorrow. But it was no use. There were 2 copies of the case file. One was held by the prefect, and the other was filed with the Censorate. Cui Shuijian's father could suppress the prefect's copy, but he couldn't touch the one at the Censorate. My father has a former classmate at the Censorate. By tomorrow morning, that document will be delivered straight to the main hall. I rolled over, facing the wall. Biwu moved softly in the outer room, the sounds of her tidying the medicine bowls and copper basins faint and rhythmic. She lit a small lamp and placed it on the corner of the table before retreating to the small couch in the outer room to lie down. After about the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the sound of footsteps echoed in the courtyard again. I opened my eyes. Nanny Kai pushed the door open and entered. She was alone, carrying a small food box in her hand. She walked over to the edge of the couch, sat down, and rested the box on her knees. The gatekeeper just came to report that after the son-in-law left the manor, he didn't head straight back to his residence. Instead, he took a detour to the street where the Chui family lives in the south of the city, she said in a lowered voice. He stopped at the Chui family's back gate for about the time it takes to drink 2 cups of tea before leaving. Did anyone from the Chui family come out to meet him? Yes. It was a maidservant wearing a bluish-gray vest, likely someone close to Miss Chui. The 2 of them spoke for a few moments in the alley, and then the son-in-law headed back. Nanny Kai looked at me and waited for a moment. When I didn't speak, she didn't press further, simply lifting the lid of the food box and placing a plate of osmanthus cake on the table. "Tomorrow at the hour of Qin," she said. "The master has already sent word to the Censorate. Rest assured, by the time the prefectural court convenes, their people will have arrived." I reached out, pinched a piece of osmanthus cake, and put it in my mouth. The sweetness of the sugar-preserved osmanthus slowly dissolved across my tongue. "Nanny," I spoke only after I had finished chewing the cake, "after the court session tomorrow, prepare a document for me." "What kind of document?" "A letter of divorce," I said. Nanny Kai's movements came to a halt. She looked up at me, the lamplight flickering across her face. "Have you made up your mind, miss?" "I've made up my mind." She snapped the lid of the food container back on and stood up. "Fine," she said. "Tomorrow, after the court session concludes, I will have the accountant prepare the divorce papers in advance, just waiting for you to speak the word." She turned to walk out. Upon reaching the doorway, she turned back to take one last look. "Miss," she said, "you have more ideas than the master expected." I didn't respond. She closed the door and left. The lamp wick crackled, and Biwu turned over in the outer room. Lying in the darkness, I swallowed the last bite of the osmanthus cake. Once the sweetness faded, only the bitterness of the medicine remained at the back of my tongue. 8:45 in the morning, the main hall of the yamen. Supported by Biwu, I entered through the side door. The cotton cloth wrapped around the back of my head had been replaced with fine white silk, and I wore a veiled hat over it. The hall was already filled with people. The prefect sat in the seat of honor, with a clerk spreading out paper and brushes at the side of the desk. An official from the Censorate sat in the chair to the left, a scroll of paper also laid out before him. Xie Chongwen stood to the right. He had changed into a plain green robe and stood there with a poised posture. As I entered, his gaze swept across my face before returning to the desk in front of him. "Jiang, step forward." The prefect spoke. Biwu supported me as I walked to the center of the hall. I let go of her hand and stood steady on my own. Yesterday, the prefectural office inspected the scene of the fire, and today the court is in session to record supplementary testimony. The prefect picked up the scroll of documents on the desk and flipped through it. The copper window latch found at the scene was examined by the coroner. The break is clean, indicating it was severed by a sharp blade. "Do you know if that window was usually kept locked?" "It was locked." "Who was responsible for locking it?" "The old madam herself," I said. "The back window faces the alley. The old madam said she couldn't rest easy at night if it wasn't locked, so she would personally bolt it every day before nightfall. No one else was allowed to touch it." The prefect glanced sideways at the clerk, whose pen tip made 2 quick marks on the paper. "What time did you wake up that night?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" "I blacked out," I said. By the time I regained consciousness, Biwu was pounding on the door. I heard her shouting that there was a fire, so I got up from the couch and ran out. By the time I reached the hallway, the flames had already blocked the door. As I headed toward the pillars, a purlin fell from the roof, and the bronze paperweight struck me on the head. I don't know what happened after that. I spoke slowly, pausing for a breath between each sentence. After the prefect finished listening, he glanced at the clerk, who drew a line under the words "does not know." "Did you hear the old madam shouting?" "I did." "What was shouted?" "Shouts for help. Shouts for someone to come. Shouts of my name." The hall fell silent for a breath. Xie Chongwen stood at the head of the right side, his left hand hanging by his side. I stared at his cuff for a moment, it wasn't clenched. "Editor Xie," the prefect turned toward him, "did you happen to notice the latch on the rear window of your mother's room?" "I never took notice," Xie Chongwen's voice remained steady and unhurried. I leave for the Hanlin Academy at the hour of Mao and do not return until the hour of you. Household matters are mostly handled by my mother and my wife. Have you purchased any tung oil for your home within the last 3 months? I have. Xie Chongwen paused for a breath. The old beams in the study were infested with insects, so I ordered tung oil to be bought for repairs, though the work has not yet begun. That barrel of oil is stored in the woodshed behind the east wing. How long has it been sitting there? About 2 months. The prefect didn't press further, shifting his gaze back to the case files. I stood below the dais, the veil of my hat draping before my face. Through the gauze, I could see the lines of Xie Chongwen's profile pull taut. Editor Xia, for what purpose did you go to Assistant Minister Chui's residence in the south of the city last night? Xie Chongwen's hand twitched. I saw it, the fabric of his left sleeve suddenly bunched into a crease, the mark of a fist clenched and then released. I have some personal ties with the Chui residence, and I happened to pay a visit while passing by last night. At what time last night? At the end of the hour of the dog, around 9 p.m. The end of the hour of the dog, the prefect repeated the words. You left the yamen at the third quarter of the hour of the rooster, 6:45 p.m., rested at home for 2 quarters before heading out again, and it takes about 2 quarters to walk to the Chui residence in the south of the city, which would indeed be the end of the hour of the dog. When you went to the Chui residence, whom did you meet? Xie Chongwen fell silent for a moment. Miss Chui. Which Miss Chui? The eldest daughter of Vice Minister Chui's household. For what purpose did you go to the Chui residence in the dead of night to see the eldest daughter of the Chui family? The hall fell into a complete silence. Xie Chongwen stood there, his Adam's apple bobbing slightly, he was swallowing. This humble official. I will speak. I spoke up. The prefect's gaze shifted to my face, and Xie Chongwen turned to look at me as well. With the gauze curtain blocking his view, he couldn't see my expression clearly, but I could see his. The nails of his left hand were digging into the fabric of his sleeve, his knuckles turning white. 3 months ago, when Chongwen started bringing tung oil into the house, he told me it was for renovating the study, I said. But the study is in the east courtyard, yet the tung oil he bought was piled in the woodshed behind the east wing. The old madam lives in the east wing, and that woodshed is only 2 steps away from her back window. Jiangshi, Xie Chongwen's voice rose half an octave. The latch on the old madam's back window was cut from the outside, I continued, without looking at him. The only person who could get close to that window would be someone climbing over the wall from the direction of the woodshed. To climb over, one would first have to step on the tiles atop the woodshed roof. Only by breaking them could one find a foothold. Your Excellency, there are several broken tiles on the roof of the woodshed. You must have seen them during your inspection, haven't you? The prefect did not answer. He closed the case file in his hands and gestured to the clerk. The clerk flipped open another sheet of paper, a transcript delivered by the Censorate earlier that morning. 3 tiles on the woodshed roof were shattered, with the fragments scattered on the floor inside and the jagged edges facing outward, proving they were crushed from the top down. After reading the sentence, the prefect placed the paper back on the desk. Editor Xia, you had those barrels of tung oil piled up for 2 months. Why did they happen to be moved directly under the main window of the east wing the very night before the fire? Xie Chongwen did not answer. His left hand gripped his sleeve so tightly that his entire hand was trembling slightly. Your Honor, I said, when exactly did Chongwen find out about those barrels of oil? The prefect glanced at me, then turned his gaze towards Xie Chongwen. Editor Xia, you speak. Xie Chongwen stood in the center of the hall, a faint flush slowly creeping up his upright face, starting from the base of his ears and spreading upward. This official was not aware. You were aware, I said. I took off my veiled hat, revealing the back of my head wrapped in white silk. As the light from the hall fell upon it, a faint yellow stain of medicine seeped through the fabric, where the swelling protruded significantly. When you came to see me last night, you asked me 3 times what I had seen, I said. You were afraid I had seen who cut open your mother's window. But you didn't ask me what your mother's final words were. Xie Chongwen looked up sharply. She cried out. Girline, don't come over, I said. That's what she said. She saw someone climbing over the roof of the woodshed, she recognized who it was, and so she shouted for me not to come over. A deathly silence filled the hall. When that person climbed over the roof of the woodshed, he crushed 3 tiles, I said. He pulled that bucket of tung oil out from the shed, poured it under the windowsill, and lit it with a fire starter. When the tung oil caught fire, he climbed over the wall and left. As he went over, the hem of his robe snagged on the copper latch of the back window. The latch had been cut beforehand. Once it was severed, the window could be pushed open with a touch. The fire poured in through the window, the door was consumed by flames, and the old lady couldn't get out. I stopped. Xie Chongwen's lips were moving, but no sound came out. Your Excellency, I turned my head toward the presiding magistrate. Last night, before I lost consciousness, I saw something at the corner of the hallway pillar. The firelight was bright then, and I thought it was just a scrap of cloth. But when I woke up in the middle of the night and thought back on it, the color and texture looked like the cuff of a Hanlin Academy official robe. I glanced at Xie Chongwen's left sleeve. The fabric of that cuff was stone blue, with an off-white lining. A corner was missing from that official robe. Your Excellency can have the investigator search Senior Compiler Xie's study to see if it has been patched. Xie Chongwen's back slammed into the pillar behind him. He could no longer stand steady. His entire body slid down against the pillar as his left hand remained tightly gripped around his cuff. The prefect closed the case file. Take Xie Chongwen away, he said. Seal the records and transfer them to the Ministry of Justice for review. 2 bailiffs stepped forward and grabbed Xie Chongwen by the arms. As he was being dragged down from the hall, he finally lifted his head and looked at me, his lips trembling as he mouthed something. I didn't hear it, nor did I intend to. The people in the hall began to disperse. The officials from the Censorate placed the transcripts into a box and rose to take their leave. The clerks organized the files behind their desks, and the prefect stood up, dusting the hem of his robe. Biwu came forward to support my arm. Miss, shall we go? Let's go. I turned and walked toward the side door. The wound on the back of my head began to throb with a dull ache again, but my steps remained steady. As I passed through the side door, Nanny Kai was waiting outside, holding a scroll of paper in her hand, the divorce papers. Miss, shall I hand it over now? Submit it. Nanny Kai turned and walked toward the clerk inside the yamen. I stood under the corridor outside the side door, where the morning light hit the gray brick floor, casting a long shadow. Behind me, the bailiffs in the hall were moving chairs and tables, the wood hitting the brick floor with a dull thud. Biwu stood beside me in silence. I looked up at the corner of the eaves. The sky was very blue, without a single trace of a cloud. The story ends here. Thank you all for your company, and see you in the next one.